We have it in our heads that everyone else just knows everything they're doing, right? They're doing perfect TDD or BDD. They're taking it slow. They're doing it right. It's just perfect, right? And no. From what I've heard and from what I've talked from the people I've talked to, no, these people, whether they admit it or not, at some point just feel exactly like this. Because it's impossible to know it all. It's just impossible. And the worst part is, we can be honest with our friends and with our team members, but especially when you go to a conference and you're talking to people you don't know, you sometimes have this, I don't know, we shouldn't do it, but sometimes you feel like you need to blend in. And when everyone is talking about this general concept, well, you can't be the only one who doesn't know what it is, right? So what you have to say is, why, of course I'm familiar with temporal databases. I only use it every day, right? Yes, I'm totally with you guys on this conversation, right? It reminds me of Homer.
Now we're going to run a few tests. This is a simple lie detector. I'll ask you a few yes or no questions, and you just answer truthfully. Do you understand?
Yes.
Right? I feel that way too much. I hate it. But if you think about it, I'm not sure it was always this way. It definitely wasn't all this way in the web world. At one point, HTML and CSS were learnable. You couldn't do much. It didn't have any behavior, but you could figure it out, right? It was kind of a crappy site, but we all did it. You could do it. But now, it's a little bit different. I prepared for this, so get ready. We have a few slides to cover. Yes, we have to learn HTML and CSS, right? It's the bedrock. Okay, we can do that. But you know what? CSS is actually frustrating, and when you just want a grid that works in every single browser, it might be nice to use a framework. So let's figure out Bootstrap and Foundation. You'll probably toy around with both. Okay, but wouldn't it be nice if we could have includes and variables in our CSS? It doesn't support that natively, or at least not in a way that we can use right now. So let's figure out Sass, Less, or Stylus, or something else that's coming up soon. Cool. But you know what? It would be cool if we could have a little bit of behavior, right? So we need to figure out JavaScript, but JavaScript kind of sucks. It's way better now than it was back in the day, but back in the day, it was just frustrating, right? So we're going to do that. Okay, cool. But now I'd like to be able to change things and have them reflected on my server, but we don't even really know what a server is just yet. We'll get to that in a minute. So we need to learn Ajax, but you know what? Just Ajax, vanilla Ajax, especially 2008 Ajax, whoo, hard stuff. So you know what? Why don't we learn a framework like Vue.js or Ember or Backbone or React? But you know what? I heard a new framework's coming out next week, so scratch those off the list and learn that one instead. Cool. So we've submitted something to the server, but what is the server? We need to learn a language like PHP or Python or Ruby. Which one? You'll probably end up using all of them. Those are going to take you years and years to learn. Great, go ahead and do that. Okay, so now we want to persist this data, right? So we'll probably use SQL, but there's lots of options. So we need to learn that language, and that will take some time to learn as well. Cool. But now at this point, we still just, right above the doc type in your HTML, we're just doing all of our database queries with PHP, right? We can't do that. We need something that provides a little bit more structure. So let's learn a framework like Laravel or Symfony or CodeIgniter or whatever comes out next year. That will take years. Okay, so we don't want to reinvent the wheel, right? So we're going to use Composer, and we're going to go and use packages. So we're going to go to GitHub and try to figure out how to use those packages. Okay, that's good. Next, we're starting to feel good, but you know what? I'm going to bring you down a notch. Do you really understand object-oriented programming? Most of us learn how to create a person class, but it takes a long time to really understand what it means and this idea of messaging. Okay, so do you understand inheritance and composition and polymorphism and encapsulation and interfaces? Great job. Let's move on to something else. What about the command line, right? Jessica was talking about she doesn't really like to show others because she doesn't feel that comfortable with it. Totally understandable, but you got to learn it a little bit. Okay, we'll do that. Well, you know what? It would be nice if we had some version control, right? Because right now, when we finish a project, we just kind of create a backup and we call it project complete. And then we realize it's not complete, so we copy it and paste it and rename it to project complete for real this time. We don't want to do that, right? So we need to learn Git, and as we learned today, Git can actually be pretty complex. And next, we want to share our code, so we need to use GitHub and figure out all the jargon associated with that. Let's learn that. Next, Vim. We're working on our production server. At the very least, you need to understand some basic commands, and you need to understand that there's different modes when it comes to Vim. Excuse me, this is hard. But also, you may decide that you want that to be your main editor, right? I used Vim for many years. You will get a huge benefit from using it. Nonetheless, you need to understand the basics. Okay, next, Well, Apache, Nginx, what's the difference? You're probably going to end up using both, so make sure you figure that out. And then what about when it comes to building up servers, right? That's kind of confusing. We want a virtual machine. This is hard. I don't know what I'm doing. Why don't we figure out Vagrant? Okay, but you know what? Vagrant's kind of hard, so it would be nice if we had a wrapper around Vagrant, like Homestead, to make this easier. Cool. Could we do the same thing for production? Sure, let's use Forge. All right, we're figuring all this out. Give me just a minute to catch my breath. We have a lot to cover. We got more to do. Okay, 2 more slides. MVC. Now, do you understand MVC, or do you understand kind of the web version of MVC, which actually isn't MVC, but does it matter? Who knows? Or what about MV star and every iteration of MV star? You need to figure those out, or you're not a professional developer. Okay, namespacing. Okay, it's kind of new to PHP. Do you totally understand it? Do you understand how that works with PSR4 autoloading? If not, take a minute and learn that. What about regular expressions? That's a whole language in itself. Do you understand the difference between a star and a plus and a question mark? You need to understand this, so that'll take many, many months. Go figure that out. What about testing? Ooh, you're not a professional developer unless you're testing, right? So you need to understand, well, which framework do you use, right? PHP Unit or PHP Spec or Codeception or Behat or some other tool I'm not thinking of right now? Make sure you at the very least, try out some of them, and the reality is you'll end up using a few of them. And we haven't even talked about the jargon that's associated with it, which is completely overwhelming. And the worst part is nobody actually agrees on what these terms mean. Okay, 5 years, easy. Design patterns, right? These are great. These are common solutions to common problems. The issue is when people try to apply them way too early. The reality is you want to refactor. You want to use design patterns to refactor. And if you decide, you know what, this actually isn't better, then you refactor away from them. That's how it works. But people try to apply them too early, and then they try to enforce them on others. Okay. Well, at the very least, you need to learn this stuff. Okay, what about security? Surely you're not storing passwords in clear text, right? I know a business that actually did that. I worked for that business. We'll talk about that later. Okay, what about architecture, right? I wasn't responsible for it, so it's okay. What about architecture? Everyone talks about architecture. We don't really know what it means. We just kind of have this basic idea. Take some time to learn that. That's going to take your whole career. Okay, what about command bus and CQRS and event storming and emergent design? This is all great stuff, but it takes a long time to learn. And then, you know, if you're going to go out on your own, you need to have a basic understanding of the UI. You don't have to be a designer, but you need to know what you're doing, right? So UX, user psychology, Chrome DevTools, you need to optimize performance. Okay, that will take quite a bit of work. Now, what about the acronym Avalanche, like PSRs and CRUD and REST and Active Record versus Data Mapper and ADR and TDD and BDD and DDD and DDD again and Solid, and then before you know it, the reality is everything I covered on that list doesn't amount to half of it. And we all know, like, that stuff is, you kind of need to learn it to some extent, right? And if you haven't gotten to some of those items, then you will in the next few years. And after you do your best, and you've been working at this for years upon years, you release some code, and of course, these kind of Reddit comments come up. Yeah, that's great, but does it scale? Scale? I know you said you know Solid, but I'm looking through your code, and your code does not follow Solid, so what are you doing? Why are you even a coder, right? This is hard, and people will just knock you down, right? This is a real quote. Stop building things your code doesn't follow SRP. That's a real quote on Reddit. Screw that guy, right? This is hard stuff, and when you release code, it's kind of a vulnerable thing, right? At least it is for me. I don't know how it is for you, but it feels like this, right? It feels that way to me.